Welcome to the Power Panel Podcast Echoes, a segment of our show dedicated to intergenerational conversations with some of Africa's young, dynamic women leaders. I am your host, Ambassador Rachel Omamo, a senior counsel, diplomat, and former cabinet minister in Kenya. My guest today is Ottilia Anna Maunganidze, Head of Special Projects at the Institute of Security Studies, one of Africa's leading multidisciplinary human security organizations. Ottilia Anna is an outstanding South African thought leader and analyst, as well as an influential international lawyer and human rights advocate. She promotes human security in Africa by advancing peace and justice. In this episode, I'm keen on exploring the dialectic between power, leadership, and values, and the impact of this tension on a leader's sense of self and their convictions. Welcome to the Power Panel Echoes, Ottilia Anna. I want to start this interview by recalling the first time that I met you. I was at a conference, I think in Munich, and you were moderating the panel that I was participating in. And I remember saying to myself, my goodness, this is such a confident, self-assured young lady. And we commented about it with my PA and so on. I wondered whether confidence is your trademark, your most compelling attribute.
Well, firstly, thanks a lot for that compliment. I really appreciate it. I will say, at the time you were cabinet secretary, and I thought very much the same of you, which is I'm seeing confidence. I'm seeing the kinds of things that I hope reflected in African women generally. When it comes to speaking or moderating sessions, I will say over time the skill that I've had to develop is listening more than anything else. So it's one thing to be able to speak. It's one thing to be able to command a room. But if you're not a good listener, if you're not paying attention to what people are saying, that comes through in the way in which you moderate. It's less about yourself. If you're moderating in particular, it's less about yourself and more about ensuring that you get out of the people that are speaking the points that they want to make, that those come out clearly. And the only way you can do that is paying attention to what they're saying.
So you developed a listening skill over time, but was your confidence nurtured as a child? What kind of a childhood did you have?
Right. I am the fifth of 5 children. I don't know whether by coming fifth, and we're all sort of 8 years apart, right? So we're very close in terms of age. I don't know whether coming out of a home of 5 children kind of just makes you exchange at home with your siblings, with your parents. But what I will say is I was very fortunate. Both parents, both our father and our mother, are 2 people that encourage conversation, encourage being inquisitive and asking the right questions, and in many ways challenging authority, if you will. So I think having a home space that allowed exchange, that allowed conversation, definitely contributed to me feeling that if I can speak to these people in this way, I can speak to the rest of the world. I do also feel that being the last of 5 children definitely meant the others have been speaking for some time before you arrived. They've made their space also. So there's an element there of not just them holding space for me, but there's an element there also of me sitting back often, listening for sure, paying attention to what they're saying, and then formulating my own opinions. Now that we're all adults, middle-aged, I will say perhaps one of my main confidants in total are my siblings. So I think that space to be able to talk through issues, whether it's just a chilled conversation or very important issues both within the family, but also around global debates. I mean, if you were a fly on the wall in our WhatsApp group, you would probably be wondering, are these just siblings having these conversations? Because we've really taken that as the space in which we're most comfortable to speak freely and to be able to exchange. So childhood definitely contributed in many ways, but I would say that this is a journey we are on together, even into adulthood. So it didn't stop as a child.
So, do you think that this ability to express yourself, this way of yours of being articulate, is the foundation of your leadership?
I've never really thought about it in that way. But I will say a few years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting with University of Pretoria students that were part of their UN society at university. And in that exchange, one of the students came up to me afterwards and said, "You know, when you talk, we listen." And I thought, when people talk, I listen, right? But that said something to me. This is maybe about a decade ago when the student approached me with this comment. And then I realized that indeed people do listen when I speak. Now, what that means, and I'm talking now from a responsible leader point of view, is what that means is that's something that I shouldn't take lightly, because I shouldn't just speak glibly, because people will listen or they'll take on board some of the things that I say and run with it. I found, and this is perhaps an important reflection on my part, I found that people that are listened to are rarely fact checked. So if you are a person who commands a space, who commands a room, by virtue of that, you may find yourself in a leadership position, but very few people after you speak go and say, "What did Ambassador Amamo say? Was that true?" They just assume it to be true. So for me, I've taken that to mean I have to be responsible in the things that I say, the platforms in which I say them, and who I communicate with. Because if what that student said is right, that when I speak, people listen, then I have a responsibility to make sure that what I say reflects myself. But I'm an African and traditional at that. So it reflects myself, it reflects my family, it reflects my clan. And that's very important to me, that I don't speak out of turn just because it's me in a relaxed space. I enter into a room not only as Ottilia Anna, but Ottilia Anna Maunganidze of the Lion Clan,
Oh,
quite
wow.
frankly.
Oh, wow. But it tells me something about your understanding of power. So you understand that this ability to communicate is power and that power needs to be constrained.
100%. Some of the world's greatest, and I mean great in terms of amount of power, not necessarily because they were good. Some of the world's greatest leaders were amazing orators. And through that oration, they've been able to, or were able to, rally masses to do some of the worst in the world. When people describe, for example, Adolf Hitler, the one thing they refer to is his speeches. They refer to his literature. Now, one can choose that path, an extreme path in which you use a skill that you have to rally up millions for hate, or you can use that skill for better and for good. But it also means being able to rein yourself in. In my mind, leadership is not about standing at the front of the room, but it's about being able to see the people that you are leading and appreciating their inputs, their insights, and not manipulating or instrumentalizing them. And some of the greatest, and this is now in the positive sense, some of the greatest leaders have also been great orators. I often say, cliche as it may sound, that one of my inspirational leaders is Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela. And one of the things that he was good at is when he spoke, people went quiet. And he would speak for the duration of that time and allow people to engage with him and respond. But he was a great orator in the positive way, allowing communities to rally behind positive leadership. And he used that in a positive sense. But many others, unfortunately, knowing that power, yielding that power, they often use it also to garner popular support, whether or not that popular support is positive.
You became a lawyer. Were you inspired by Nelson Mandela?
No.
Or by something else? So what made you become a lawyer?
Well, I didn't think this question was going to come up because when I say it, and I hope young women listeners on the call or tuning in don't go, well, this is how I'm going to go about it. So I went to university relatively young. I was 17 years old. Now, 17-year-olds can make life-changing decisions, some of them positive, some of them not so. When I went to university, believe it or not, Rachel, I had the full plan and vision that I'm going to come out of it as an archaeologist.
Wow.
An anthropological archaeologist at that. I had an interest in people, I had an interest in people's histories, and I was a particularly great geography student, so I knew that this is something that I would be good at. Now, I went to university at a time in South Africa where we had what we now refer to as judicial activism. So at the time, a lot of the constitutional court decisions that people now refer back to, these were some of the new decisions that were coming. So when I got to university, I accompanied a friend to an introductory lecture in law. And the people that were giving this introductory lecture focused on two things. They focused on constitutionalism and they focused on human rights. So here I was, a person that was going to become an archaeologist, completely wrapped by this idea that you could shape a country through judicial activism, that the law could be used as a tool for bad, but it could also be used as a tool to rebuild for good. And I was going, how am I going to reconcile my interest in this new thing that I'd never thought about and being an archaeologist? The law schedule and the geography schedule for first year were exactly the same. So here's a 17-year-old who is interested, who has this vision, who's told their parents that after 4 years, an archaeologist is coming home, who's suddenly intrigued by the Constitution and by human rights. So what did I do in the infinite wisdom of a 17-year-old? I wrote an L and a G on 2 pieces of paper, and I shuffled them. Horrible advice to anyone. And I picked L. And then I thought, okay, clearly archaeology is not going to be what I pursue. But after first year, you can always decide if you want to go back to what you initially wanted to do. So that's where it started. And in that time, then I became interested in constitutional law in particular. And of course, Nelson Mandela, the current president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, were both people instrumental in the development of South Africa's constitution, in negotiating a rights-based system for this country. But they were also 2 Black men that until independence would not have been listened to. And here I am, a Black woman who recognized the power in that. And so I pursued a career in law. And here we are. Not the best start.
Well, you ended up doing something that you loved, clearly. And you chose human rights law, but you didn't practice in the courts. You chose to get into the arena of advocacy, research. I guess this led you to the Institute for Security Studies, where you are now.
Indeed. So first, I worked at the legal clinic in a small town called Makanda, which is where Rhodes University is. So it was there, I would say, that actually it became very clear to me that I wanted to pursue a career in which the law is used for good and not only as an easy way to get a solid income. I was advising the indigent community of Makanda. These are people that could not afford legal aid otherwise, and people whose issues are often put at the back burner in the courts. So I did, during that time, go to court at the Magistrate and High Court in Makanda for about a year and a half. But in that time, I also was very involved in the work of Amnesty International. I served as their human rights education officer, and that meant I was going into schools, so primary and high schools, to teach children about their fundamental rights. What we recognized then was often people don't necessarily exercise their freedoms because they don't know that they have them. They don't know that they have the right to basic education. They don't know that it's unacceptable for them to not have running water because the right to water is available to them. So it was within that space that I started thinking about the world aside from the privileges that I had. So I had the right to education, and I was able to get some of the world's best education at that. I come from a fairly privileged background, but it was in working with the indigent communities in Makanda that I thought perhaps I could do more. And so I did a postgraduate in international studies. And this postgraduate exposed me to the Institute for Security Studies because one of our visiting lecturers happened to be a program head for a program on African security analysis at the ISS. And he said to me, I understand you want to be a human rights lawyer, but don't you think you have a knack for analysis? And I said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've heard. But thank you for the compliment, and we'll see. Anyway, 6 or so months later, I decided to apply for a position at the ISS, and here we are. Over 16 years later, that I have worked at the Institute in various capacities. And so I'm grateful for the detour that I took to focus on international studies because I felt my law degree was great, but I felt it was insufficient for the work that I hoped to do going forward.
At ISS, you have a much richer palette now. It's research, it's analysis, it's advocacy. You also do training. I think you need to have a particular mindset to do this work. And I want you to listen to something that Dr. Comfort Ero said to us when we interviewed her last year.
So you spend a lot of time always just trying to understand the nature of things, to figure out why certain things are happening, to try to connect certain events together, to understand the connections between peoples, places, and events. You're always questioning.
So basically, what she's saying is that you have to have a curious mind, you have to be patient, you have to drill down to the granular issues, and it's all about figuring out things. Have you always had that mindset? Is it something that was latent, or is it something that once you got into ISS, it just flourished and you became this person who was able to be really reflective and to consider issues in a very holistic way and come up with sound solutions for difficult problems?
Mm. What I'll add to what Comfort said, and Comfort is a great friend and confidant as well. Two things. The one is the kind of work that we do also requires you to not be the center of that work, right? So to take a step back, as Comfort says, so to speak, ask the right questions, observe, be curious, be willing to learn, but also be willing to be wrong. Now, when you are, which is what a lot of our teams are, really smart people, it can be difficult to accept that you're not right on a particular issue or that new facts challenge what you assumed. Now, for me, and when we started this conversation, we were talking about leadership more generally, but also around the ability to speak and to listen. And I did allude to the fact that this is something that, for me, I can really say comfortably that it started at home. Having parents or having siblings that encourage you to ask questions and that encourage you to also not just take everything at face value, really in my professional life has really helped. It's helped me to be able to interrogate things beyond the surface level. But don't get me wrong, this is not just a thing that you're born with, quite frankly. It's also a thing that you learn. And one of the things that I will say, working in a space where the issues are not about you. So when I engage with policymakers or decision makers, you have to do that with a great amount of humility. It's not you that's going to change policy. It's not you that's going to make this groundbreaking shift, right? You, as Ottilia Anna, in my case, you are probably going to influence the decisions that are made. And in order for you to be able to influence those decisions, a relationship of trust has to be built. It requires and I've had some challenging exchanges with people who now I consider to be really close friends, where the research that we've done, the analysis that we've done points to something else. And they come and they say, no, I don't accept what you're saying. I disagree. Right? And being able to sit together at a table and say, this is what our teams are seeing on the ground. If you don't do A, B, C, these are the outcomes that will come of that. Now, you can accept that this is something that you're willing to take on as your intended outcomes. But if they're not, this is what we recommend to be the correct pathways. Now, to have that conversation, you do need to first be able to lean on your research for sure, but you also need to have done the hard work of building that relationship of trust. And that relationship of trust is not built overnight. It takes time. It takes a lot of back and forth. It takes people hearing you say the same thing sometimes over and over again for them to actually go, well, she seems to believe this, for example. But it also takes you being humble enough to take a step back and say, I am but an analyst. I provide you the information, I provide you what our teams have seen and what they have observed, and I am trusting you to use this in the best way possible, given your mandate and given the limitations of that mandate as well. So yes, be curious, but also be open to being wrong.
So in other words, what you're saying to me, Ottilia Anna, is that you have to learn how to swallow your ego. Keep it down, even if you're gagging.
100%. But it also means where, for example, you are right, right? So what you are saying on the evidence that is before you, on all the information that exists, where you are right, it also means having the courage to stand on that, having the courage to defend the work of your colleagues, and having the courage to say, okay, this is what we see. If you disagree, you disagree, but please at least consider what we've said.
So is it the art of persuasion then? Are you talking about the art of persuasion?
It's part of it, but I think it's important not to just persuade because you want to assert that you're right. I think if I can take a step back, Rachel, earlier I mentioned the work that I did in legal aid. Easily could have pursued any other career, but it's also about why is it we're having the conversation to begin with? What is the intent behind the work? So if, for example, you are pushing a message to say we need to be resolving a conflict, it requires you to humble yourself and to enter a room and to listen to the other side, even if you disagree with them, right? But the intention is not to have people sit around the table. The intention is peace. For that, you need to be strong. For that, you need to be unrelenting. So less persuading, but you need to be committed. And to do that, you have to have clear principles and values that guide that. So you shouldn't be, how do you say, like a reed in the wind, right? Where whatever comes is where you go. For some issues, you do have to be steadfast, and you might not get it. People might not agree, and then you need to learn sometimes to stop pushing and let time take its course.
Okay, so it's quite a difficult field to be in. I mean, you can't prevaricate on your values. You have to reaffirm your values, I guess, every day. But thinking about you as a person working in this field, what's your Achilles heel? What's your weakness?
Right. My weakness is that I genuinely believe that people can be better. And you need to understand why this is a weakness. So where I have dedicated most of my work and interest has been on international criminal justice. Now, international criminal justice is dealing with accountability for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression, right? These are the crimes that reflect the worst that humanity can be. So for you to be a person in this space that thinks we can still get some good out of this means you will be set up for disappointment constantly. It means that where you are pushing for forms of accountability, and not only criminal accountability, mind you, restorative and rehabilitative accountability, that you will be disappointed constantly, because not everyone believes in good, and not everyone is willing to do the hard work to be able to ensure that people are held accountable. So the fact that I can still believe that people that have committed genocide, that there can be some good in them, for sure, for me, is something that is definitely an Achilles heel, because there I am in a room with people that many communities may regard to be the worst that humanity has, and I look at them and I think, still we can be able to work with these people to negotiate or to assist in negotiating peace for the greater good. And that takes a lot for someone who's dedicated a lot of their career to saying, if you have committed crime, you must be held accountable. What happens if others don't agree with you?
I see it's an area where you are often disappointed and that it can be soul draining and it can sap you of hope. Where do you get your support from? What makes you get up every morning and keep going back and keep being hopeful and keep being driven?
Right. I am fortunate to have the family that I have and the network of friends and colleagues that I have. So I'll start with the colleagues. So my colleagues and I deal with the same issues. We deal with the same hurdles. We face the same challenges. So we're able to kind of lean on each other and say, we can improve here, or we did our best, and this is all we can do. And then I come to my friends and my family. Now, this might seem to others to say, well, we're talking about really heavy professional things here, but over 2/3 of my day is not in the office, right? Whether I'm sleeping or whether I'm out among friends, family, society. So it helps to have a strong support system, a support system that is in many ways your cushion, the thing that you can lean on. But to have a strong support system, if I may, you also have to be prepared in moments where the people that support you need your support. So I'm extremely fortunate to have that, to have sounding boards, to have, as a friend and I reflected over the weekend, to have someone where you can just sit in silence and be comfortable and be comforted in knowing that you have that group of people or even that person that allows you to take a deep breath, literally, and just be able to carry on. The other thing, which is outside of people, is I really enjoy being outdoors. So I spend a lot of time, whether on a hiking trail or just being in the outdoor space. And that allows me to center myself in ways that people cannot do. I always say to people, when people are saying some of the most outrageous things, I always say to them, go touch grass, literally. Go and just ignore the noise, ignore the commotion, literally and physically touch grass, be rooted, recognize you are one in 8.1 billion now, but also that you need that moment where you can just take a very deep breath, come back to yourself, be grounded, be rooted, and when you need to, lean on the support systems that you have. And I cannot stress enough that your support systems should not only be professional. Your support systems should not only be in personal life. Have a support system that is as rounded as you want to be.
Okay. Well, I love the touch grass thing,
Please do it, please.
I'm sort of person who likes to, I'll say, listen to a bird, but I think we mean the same thing about, how nature refreshes, how it uplifts, and how it redirects you in times of crisis. As we take this short power break, we ask that you subscribe to the Power Panel podcast. Let's work together to expand the Power Panel community. Visit our website, birdsongafrica.com, and follow us on social media to plug into the Power Panel network. Email your thoughts to hello@birdsongafrica.com. This is the Power Panel podcast. Echoes. Now, I just want to get into your growth tactics, what you do to keep yourself on a trajectory of improvement. I'm wondering, is being available to moderate panels, to speak at conferences, to participate in task forces and committees, is this a growth strategy for you? Or is it something that just happens to you because, well, you're a great orator?
It's a combination of those, right? So maybe let me start with really being quite strategic. What I'm strategic about is what engagements I take part in. If you were to take a scan of my inbox, you would be like, well, why isn't she speaking all the time? because some of the invitations don't necessarily align with the work that I do, or don't necessarily align with my values, for example. So it might be interesting, it might be great to be platformed, but I do carefully choose the things that I can be a part of. And part of the reason I do that is because I am 100% or nothing when it comes to the work that I do. So if I agree to be part of a task force or a committee, right, I have made the decision that I'm available to actually serve on this task force or on this committee. If I say I'm going to moderate your panel, for example, I put in the work. I will never be that moderator who is caught by surprise by what their panelists think or what they come up with while we are talking. I will research who is it that will be on the panel, what have they said about this and this an issue, what are their pressure points, if I may put it that way, and what are the things that make them beam, what will make them be more open in contributing. And then if I'm a panelist also, I'm always very conscious of how much time should I be speaking? So one of the first questions I always ask is, how much time is available for this conversation? And how much do you need me to say? If I'm told 10 minutes, guaranteed the conversation will not exceed 10 minutes, because I respect people's guidelines, but I also respect people's time. And so that's the strategic aspect, if I may. But what then happens, which can become quite organic, is the more you put yourself in contexts in which you do well, the more other people recognize that work, and they're more interested in, well, will you be able to contribute to this discussion? And as I said, if I know that I cannot give it my all, I politely decline. Thank you very much. Or I ask that we do it at a time when I can give it my all. A good example, Rachel, and you'll know this, is we've had many conversations about the power panel.
Yes.
And I've been very interested in, one day I'm going to sit down and we're going to have this conversation. But I don't know if you will recall, when we were in Italy, I even said to you, it has to be at a time when I feel that we can have the conversation, where we have the freedom and the latitude to do that. What I wouldn't want to do is right now to say, oh no, I'm busy. Let's stop. Right now, I'm available to have this conversation. I'm willing to have the conversation. And so here we are. And the upside of that is that I then also have the benefit of hearing many of the other people that you've interviewed, and I'm inspired by their words. But in particular, I'm inspired by how many powerful women, powerful African women they are, that really, hopefully, can help shape a whole other generation of women that may be unsure of themselves. So yes, be strategic. Pick the right things for yourself, but also then let nature take its course. If you are able to demonstrate your work, people will see it. Work hard is what I always say, and I'll give credit to my late father on that, which is he would always say, work hard. The other thing that he always said, and I remember this distinctly when I had all A's, by the way, and I was getting prizes at prize giving. The gift card he gave me had pride comes before a fall.
Okay. All right. That's a good one. We all need to be kept humble. But do you feel you've built leadership capital?
100%. I think when I look at, for example, the different spaces in which either my expertise has been requested or my leadership has been requested, over the years, this has really reflected two things. One, that the rest of the world is paying attention to what it is that I'm actually good at and being very focused on that. And then the second thing is also that leadership fundamentally is about trust. And so to have other organizations, other individuals trusting that when I show up, I will show up, so to speak, is something very much that shows that that leadership capital, if you can call it that way, is there. But also it's something that I can be able to draw on and pull from as and when needed. But I can't stress enough that having leadership capital doesn't mean abuse the leadership capital that you have.
Mm. That brings me to a question that I'm always curious to hear a response to. As you built your leadership capital, what have you learned not to do as a leader?
Right. I've learned not to assume that you're always right. I've learned to accept that there are certain things for which other people may have the solution or the right ideas, right? So just because you have been afforded the opportunity to lead doesn't mean that you can lead in all spaces. In my family, we have, at least siblings wise, two very well accomplished medical doctors. And I always say, while I can be a leader in the space that I occupy, please, there is no scenario in which I can be like my sister, who's a pediatric nephrologist, for example, or my brother, who's a surgeon. There is no scenario in which I can lead in those spaces. And so for me, it is to recognize where you are, what is your space, and to see that there's spaces where you are not the leader. In fact, there are spaces in which you are very much probably right at the end of the pecking order, and you have to be comfortable in that. You have to be okay with not always being a leader.
Mm. Okay, I want you to listen to another clip from Comfort.
The idea of civil society, I think the idea of independent thinking, of fair-minded thinking, of trying to listen to everybody's perspective, of not being ideological, not picking sides, but only one of saving. I think that is being challenged, and you see the space for civil society being closed.
I think what Comfort is saying there is that we're living in unusual times. Everybody's talking about a post-truth world, the weakness of the multilateral system, and this space that's closing for civil society. Now, we've seen over the last few days, months, weeks, a lot of turbulence in the world, tariff disputes going on, there's been a reduction of development aid, and so on and so forth. I'm wondering what impact this has on the kind of work that you do, because your work is based on finding solutions through research and analysis. And many of these institutions in Africa rely on development assistance, assistance from governments and so on. So if this money is being reduced markedly, do you think that Africa on its own would be willing to continue to fund research, fund a reflection on development, on human security? Or are those days numbered? And if so, what are the solutions?
Very, very important question. I would argue, so first, substantively, there isn't a time in which the work of independent institutions, particularly research and analysis, but also providing technical support, where we are actually most important. Because as you say, we're living in a space in which a lot of that independence, a lot of that insight is threatened. Now, can Africa be able to take on the task of doing the work ourselves, so to speak? I think, and when I think about the continent, right, I think about how much we are richly endowed, but how those resources often don't remain with us or aren't allocated in the right spaces. If there is a time for greater solidarity on the African continent, it is now. If there is a time to look to what can we be able to contribute for ourselves before the rest of the world, it is now. How we do that, that's where, and this is the challenging part of your question, because it requires more than that. What do people call it? Political will. I always say when people say political will, they're genuinely at a loss for what needs to happen, because they're putting what is essentially will of individuals with political power in this catch-all phrasing, right? But it requires some of the internal discussions that African countries are embarking on now. It requires us to fast track those. It's not enough for an organization like the ISS to succeed. We need other organizations smaller than our own, bigger than our own, to also be doing the work. And in order for them to do so, they need to be supported. And support is both financial, but it is also in human and other ways of resourcing as well. And I think now is the opportunity for us to be knocking on a lot more doors, encouraging African philanthropists in particular to reinvest the income that they have made off the continent into the continent.
Do you think that's your next big thing?
Yeah. For me, one of the things that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from over the past few years, I serve on a selection committee for the King Baudouin Foundation. And part of it has required us to look at African organizations and to explore what African organizations are doing in order to give an Africa Prize to at least one of those every 2 years. And what I have seen on the continent is amazing innovation. The most recent prize winner is her initiative from Tanzania, youth-led, youth-backed, Tanzanian primarily funded non-governmental organization that is making waves now, not only in Tanzania, but also in East Africa. And we wouldn't have been able to even identify her initiative if we weren't going out into countries, asking people to tell us the stories of great innovation that are coming from the African continent by Africans. So my thing right now is looking beyond just the work that we do as the ISS and saying, in order for the work that we're doing to be great, so to speak, we need a lot more African organizations that are dedicated to giving back within their communities, and that's one of the things currently that I'm very passionate about, and that I'm investing a lot of my time in unlocking Africa's potential that has always been there, but I think it's important that it gets platformed.
That leads on to a question regarding, what do you think power is? What's your power mantra? In a nutshell, what would be your wise statement around power?
Right. I have to think a little bit more on this. So first, before I go to power, if you'll allow me, leadership, I always, not often, always say that we grow by building.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Precisely. For me, it says you are only a leader if you're able to uplift not only the people you care about, but your society. And what that means is you're not in this just for yourself, so to speak. And so why does this connect to power? Because for me, power means knowing that. It means recognizing that you're only in a position of power, in a position of leadership, quite frankly, because others permit you to be in that position, right? And so you need then to be able to actively invest what you have gained from your journey, from where you are in life, to be able to reinvest that. Because one thing that happens with not just leaders, but all of us, is our time comes. Now, if all you did was just for yourself and about yourself, once you leave, you are gone. There is no legacy that is left behind. And very much for me, the thing that makes you a powerful individual is the legacy that remains when you are not there. And I'm not just talking about when you pass away, right? I'm also talking about the legacy that is spoken about in rooms where you are not there. How people recognize your contribution, your power, and your leadership matters more, not where you are present, but it matters more where you are absent. We grow by building.
We grow by building. That's quite powerful, because what it says is that power comes from others.
100%.
From those who you build, yes. We thank Ottilia Anna Maunganidze for sharing her leadership truths with us. The clarity of her mind and the depth of her convictions are lambent and captivating. Through her, we discern that in the deployment of power, responsibility, trust, and the belief in others are paramount. For her, power is a gift from others. We wish her well in her future endeavors, and we also thank you most sincerely for listening and look forward to your company on our next episode. This is the Power Panel Podcast Echoes.